Melina, welcome to the All Things Risk podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. We're going to have a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So, welcome.
Hi, Ben. It's great to be here.
So, for my listeners, and just to maybe position the conversation that we're going to have, I was wondering if you could just start with your background and who you are, what you do. And when I ask this question of guests, I encourage them to take as much time as they like to answer it, because I find that some of the most interesting people in the world are those that have maybe windy career paths. So you have a very interesting educational background and professional background, but I also note that you play basketball. So curious if you could just talk to us about your background and who you are, what you do, and how you got to doing what you're doing now.
Perfect. Windy, I think it's a very good description in my case. Now for the past 10 years or so, I am a decision scientist and behavioral scientist. So I try to combine the two fields, basically improving the way that we make decisions all around. So I work with public and the private sectors, as well as with academia. So with a PhD, I teach some bachelor and master level courses in decision making. So my approach to, improving the way that we make decisions is based on bringing in, the behavioral side, both in terms of the content. I know you don't like this word, but, the practical tools that we can use, to improve our thinking, or, the methods, and so better understanding ourselves, really embracing the behavioral side of decision making, but also, because decision making is like a habit, right? It's something that you have to do every day so many times. I mean, some people say it's like we take 35,000 decisions per day, or small ones, big ones. So it's something that we do so often. It's really hard to improve on something that you keep doing automatically, without reflecting on it so much. So, behavioral science helps us in that way as well, how to improve and make that transition from, our old habits to better habits. So for me, this journey has been, from seeking precision through a bachelor in mathematics and economics to, through a windy course through, the business world, and eventually ending up with a PhD in decision science with an emphasis in behavioral science. I've come to really appreciate the fact that decision making is the basis of, the way that we lead our lives. I mean, that's self-evident, but it's something also that we're not taught it at school. It lacks, it's missing from our education, both as children and as adults as well. So, it's pretty much something that's fundamental that, we need to find ways to attract attention towards it and, try and improve it. So that's, and that's a conundrum as well, because it's not, the field that you and I and so many other people are, like in decision making, essentially, it's not easy. So, it's essentially about trying to, figure out what works, and what doesn't with people, and what people need to improve on. But by people, I mean, specific persons or specific groups we're addressing. So it's a really interesting puzzle.
And how did you get interested in the topic to begin with? When did you know that, was there a moment or some time when you said, this is the thing I want to focus on?
Well, I think throughout, the big decisions in my life,
Mhm.
it's been, I knew that I didn't have the tools to make them in the right way. I felt it, and but it wasn't until much later that I realized that, other people feel that too.
Mm.
And, then you see things happening like the big financial crisis that we went
Mhm.
through, and you see how entire countries and organizations are not sure how to handle it. Rely on the models and the numbers that we have, trying to fix numbers based on some reference points. But,
Mm.
we're missing the point. First of all, it's like, how did we end up here? And then fixing it, it's not as simple as,
Mm.
realigning some models, of course.
Mm.
And so realizing that it's a general problem, I think gave me the
Mm.
sparked the interest into looking into it more. And that was the same point in time that, uh, you know, uh, the books started coming out, Thinking Fast and
Right.
Slow,
Mm.
Nudge. And that's what drove me into a PhD to start learning more
Mm.
about direction. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's something interesting about you mentioned very senior people or heads of state or whomever who seem to be smart people, but make sometimes very poor quality decisions. And in some ways, I find that freeing because it means, I can talk to someone who may be much more experienced or seemingly smarter than I, but I also know that they're human and they're prone to these problems. They probably haven't received any training like what you provide, and therefore there is something I don't know. There's something interesting about that we're all human. I was for instance, I don't know if you've come across the very simple, you must have, the bat and ball problem. The bat costs $1 more than the ball.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, and I can put that in show notes. But it's just come across that PhDs in mathematics get that wrong. That's wow, right? So we're all fallible, aren't we? It's an interesting phenomenon.
Exactly. It's we're all fallible. We discovered it fairly recently, in a sense that
Mm.
we've admitted it, and we've seen the studies and the experiments, like the
Mm.
bat and the ball that you mentioned. In the last 20 years, they've
Mm.
become more you know popular
Mm.
and accessible, maybe even less. So it's interesting how we see the transition now to at the meeting to
Mm.
these ways that we are fallible, and hopefully finding out more about the ways that we can fix this. Hmm.
Mm.
Which
Yes.
is, yeah.
That's great. I love that. I'd like to dive into something you mentioned, and you talked about decision science and behavioral science and how you combine them. Now, I've never formally studied decision science, or I think my understanding seems to be that there are decision sciences as opposed to something called decision science. But I have seen, very intricate and been exposed to intricate quantitative approaches to decision making, very mathematical. And you mentioned something very interesting, which is around, bringing the behavioral piece, the behavioral science piece. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that and talk a little bit about your approach, because there's nothing inherently wrong with, and actually can be very useful to quantify things, but it feels kind of incomplete at times. And I'll share an experience with that in my professional context, and I'd love to get your reaction. Is I've done in the past some risk modeling work, right? So you put something in a complex financial model, and I find that sometimes the people who have degrees in finance or senior decision makers do not understand the outputs of that thing, but they're afraid to say it, and so that becomes very paralyzing. We can't get through if we don't understand what the output of something that is from this thing called decision science. And I might be getting that wrong, so please correct me. But if that's not really understood by the people who have to use the tool, then something isn't working. And your approach, combining the behavioral side and if that's what you mean, the behavioral and the more quantitative mathematical side, if that's what you mean, I think that can be very, very powerful. So I've said a lot there, but I'd love to get your reactions and your approach to combining decision sciences, I guess.
Yeah. So, well, the way I encountered it exactly, I mean, was managerial decision scientist. It was a lot of quantitative modeling, a lot of, um, econometrics, coding, a bit of uh, to analyze the data. From a financial perspective, you got all those models there, certain PPs, etc. So you have these tools that recognizably they're really good tools to use, and they're necessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
They give you information. At the same time, there's a separate, because it's not a machine handling these tools, inserting those numbers, looking for those numbers, interpreting those numbers, etc. You are feeding, and you and your team are feeding things into it. That's, what you say also afterwards, how you interpret the results is also really important. Or what results are you looking to find through this data? That's a bigger picture of, how they tie together, decision science and behavioral science. But, or rather behavioral economics. Because, the more I dive into it, the more, I distinguish, I didn't do this at first, but now I distinguish between, there's behavioral economics, which is, the more descriptive, approach of how we decide all these, the biases, the heuristics that we use. And then you have behavioral science, which based on behavioral economics, it gives you, to understand things and fresh approaches and frameworks to try and find ways to improve them. And I think that's where the gold is, the gold mine is, because we, the first step, of course, is understanding, what we're doing wrong and, confirmation bias in the way that we look for information or interpret it, etc. But then, all right, okay, how do we fix it? But like really fix it, not just, you have, a training session or you send a memo to people telling them, this thing, exists and, be aware of it. So how do you fix it through, in your, when you need to be good at it, how do you do it? And that's where, the behavioral science comes in. And there's an even deeper level because, okay, so let's say one method that, is useful and, I'm sure you know it, one tool, if you like, what they say that consider the opposite. So whenever, I'm looking to buy a computer, I think MacBooks are great, right? That's my anchor point. So, I should consider the opposite, what is wrong with MacBooks and, what could be good with a different type of computer. So, but, when you try to do that, even, you have yourself kicking, your ego kicking. You're saying, why should I do that? I have experienced my, this is my opinion. Why should I even consider the opposite? So this is interesting. So it reveals another level into the way that we make decisions that, we need to be less stubborn and less, it's about the mindset that we have to be a bit more open.
Yeah, less dogmatic. I love that. Also because sometimes I've seen senior leaders, they do not so much the more explicit as you talk about, consider the opposite, consider the problems with what we're trying to do and propose, and then they just use that to dismiss everything, right? So, oh, we might not have the capabilities. Oh no, but we do have the capabilities, or we can hire them, or we might not have the technology. Oh, by the time, and it's I think you need to actually do this in earnest. And I love how you talk about making it a practice, because then I suppose it becomes much more natural, and something that you can train, something that we can all train.
Yeah, that was the way, sorry, that Hugh framed it, making it a practice, and I loved it because, yeah, what for me, it's a decision making both as a process and as a practice, as you say.
Mm,
And, but listening to you frame it as a practice, it resonates really well with the way that, I see it as a
mm,
habit, as a, something that you need to improve every
mm.
time, like basketball.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we could talk about basketball in a second. In fact, I do like tools, but I think sometimes we look for the tool as a magic solution,
Mm.
as opposed to actually. You talk about this a lot, and maybe we can we'll talk about reframing. It's very important to frame the problem that we're trying to solve first, and the choice of tool then follows, as opposed to, oh, I know about pre-mortem, so I'm going to do pre-mortems for every single decision that I can think of, or what have you. So I do like tools, but I think sometimes it's very easy for us to dive into the tool and lose sight of the context. That's
Yeah, absolutely. I should have clarified. Yeah, exactly. It's what you say.
Mhm.
Tools. I mean, you can use a hammer, but not for every for
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
purpose. So exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious how you describe or explain what a good decision looks like to people.
My short definition that it's about the process. It's about how you got there, not about the outcome.
Mhm.
And, which has a lot of implications that, first of all, it's, it should encourage people to, register the process, write down
Mhm.
your process. So, you can improve it because that's the
Mhm.
aspect that you can improve. The outcome depends also on luck. So, and factors outside your control. So that's not, uh, something that we can dwell on. And it also gives us a little bit of freedom when something doesn't go well.
Mhm.
Uh, if we've done the process, the way that we should have, to the best of our ability, then it's not really a failure. It's about experimenting, if you like. It's
Mhm.
it's about learning. Okay, so I did it this way because I thought this was best. The outcome, or was it something that I did, or how can I improve it next time?
Mhm.
So, and when I say decision process, it's really all those things about picking the right problem to solve or the right
Mhm.
decision to make. Um, like not dwelling on gravity decisions, for example, of gravity problem. Like if you're working for a family firm and
Mhm.
you keep thinking that, I can never make it to like a manager because,
Mhm.
only the children will get promoted.
Mhm.
And that's a gravity problem. It's something that you cannot
Oh,
change. So it's not,
right.
yeah. So frame it differently. I mean, if the point
Mhm.
is the career path, okay, now the decision frame shifts completely from how you can make it within that company to how you can be
Mhm.
successful in another company.
Mhm.
So yeah, framing is really important. And there's a book I really love on
Oh,
framing.
please, yes. Uh-huh.
It's called "What's Your Problem"
Okay, great.
by I hope I say his name correctly, by Thomas Wedelsberg. I'm gonna send you the link.
Okay, great.
And he talks about framing and reframing a lot, about finding bright spots, in other
Mhm.
people who solve your problem in another country, in another industry. And,
Mhm.
basically it's embracing the creative part of
I love
framing.
that.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. We often think that we're the only ones who have, if it's a problem or some big monumental decision. We often think, hey, we're the only ones. I'm the only one that's ever dealt with this problem. And it could be something, that might feel very serious and incredibly challenging and intractable. And we think, I'm the only one. Why me? But obviously there are millions of people who have dealt with or had to confront the same or maybe sometimes even worse, right? Like whether that's a relationship thing or some type of career thing or something even something darker or more challenging. And so I love that what's your problem, and looking at other reference points and seeing how do
Yeah.
they reframe this, how do they do this.
And exactly what the author talks about is reaching out. Precisely. I
Mm,
mean, talking about it, unless it's like confidential and you only can discuss it with your team, but still talk about it with other people. And I mean, you must have come across it also, in our profession, because I suppose we usually end up in conversations
yeah.
about decision. And then this is how I see, other people's problems and, difficult decisions they're facing that, and I really can really connect to, in
Mm,
some level. And it helps me also see that, I'm not the only one dealing with this, or rushing, I remember the
mm,
time when I rushed to make a decision instead of calming myself down first,
mm.
and things like that.
I, yeah, I love all this stuff, and reframing is incredibly important. Solving the right problem is so incredibly important. We can talk a little bit about the problem with decision, I guess the decision education, or generally speaking, as you were talking about, the idea of reframing or looking elsewhere. I think one of the dangers is people copy stuff, right? So someone did this, so I'll do that, and I'll get the same outcome, but maybe not. Like I might. This is someone, for example, so and so is 2 years ahead of me. They went to this university and studied this thing, and they got that job. So if I do that, then I'll get the same outcome, and it may not be the case at all, right? So as an example, so I think it's important to go back to your point about the process and say, when we're looking at other examples, I think we need to think about how these people made the decision as opposed to, again, the outcome. So they did X, they got Y. The world typically doesn't work like that. So love to get your general thoughts in terms of,
Yeah.
if you're facing a big decision, then you're looking at others for reference points around how they did that, and how can we take the technique away as opposed to, oh, if I do this, I'm going to get that.
Right. Oh, that's brilliant, because that's picking the right reference group, right?
Mm,
Um, I was reading an example recently in it's an academic book, Bazerman and Moore's A Judgment Under Uncertainty. They
mm,
were saying, okay, so uh, your child in high school, and they're very good at the maths.
mm,
So, you insist on them, becoming a mathematician. You're sending them off to college as a
mm,
mathematician, or, you encourage them to do that, but you're using the wrong reference point, because within their classroom, okay, they are the best there, but they are the best among a group of, children that are not so interested in math. If they go to college, studying math, they'll be competing with other people who are really interested in math.
mm,
And, they will,
mm,
they won't be, the best or as good necessarily. So you can't use the first
mm.
reference group of the classroom to judge whether someone, is going to be a great mathematician or not. And similarly to what you said about, picking careers and stuff, uh, it's not really about, the characteristics that you want to compare is between, your ambitions, your values, your temperaments, your interests, that should be your reference group. Find other people who are similar in that way and see how they, what they chose to do, maybe like take a year off or study something different, or because that should be your point of reference, not, if I'm an accountant, like, my sister, it means that I will be happy and
Mm,
etc.
mm. Yeah, there's an awful lot there, and it's challenging, right? Because we want to put ourselves in the best possible position to get the types of things that we want, and sometimes that means putting ourselves in positions where we might have more options than we otherwise would. Um, and maybe we could talk a little bit about options and choices. By the way, do you make a distinction between decision and choice?
Um, no,
No.
decision
Okay.
and judgment, but decision and
Decision.
choice, no.
Okay. Okay.
Do you?
Um, I use the word decision more than choice, and I remember coming across. I think this was there's an academic distinction, but I can't quite remember all of it. But that I think the choice has decision has an element of uncertainty, and choice doesn't. So two flavors of ice cream is you're getting ice cream. So I'd have to remember. I have to go back to the whatever the reference is, but I use decision. I use option,
Hmm.
decision and option, or options related to a decision. But that I'm just just curious. I'm just nerding out on some of the vocabulary. You also have something else that I found interesting, and there's I think probably a number of techniques that you could speak to about this. You know how sometimes when we're giving advice to someone, we find it a lot easier to give advice to other people about what they should do or how they should look at a problem. And then when we're faced with something similar, it's paralyzing. And I think there's a number of techniques there about speaking to yourself as a third person as a good way of doing that. But sometimes we're giving advice, but we're projecting. So we're not in that person's shoes, and sometimes it just feels easier, and it may not be. We have to be careful, right? That you could say, well, I did this and I got that. Well, again, it doesn't work like that. We might be, if we flip it, not just we're the seeker of advice, we're also the giver of advice. People give a lot of unsolicited advice, and sometimes we're very tempted to say, well, I did X, and so you should do X, and you will get Y. And I'm just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit for us. First of all, why is it easier? Well, it feels easier to give advice rather than to take it, and then maybe talk a little bit about thinking outside in about decisions that we make, getting advice, and trying to take outside views, outside perspectives on how we might be looking at a problem.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of work around that. The bits that I caught, I mean, they're usually from Adam Grant's
Mm-hmm.
work, and he's talked about exactly what you say. I mean, you can pretend that you're giving advice to a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
What will you tell them to do in your situation? And and it's even better if I remember correctly what he said to give advice to yourself. Take a step back and try to detach yourself some way and give advice to yourself. If I'm saying it correctly. But yes, it's a dangerous thing in a sense to ask for advice, because people are projecting. So what is better to do is to ask, someone, what do you think are my options? Rather than ask them, what do you think I should do?
Mm-hmm.
It helps them to think more openly about, what the available options are. And, imagine the person that you ask for advice is someone who knows maybe a little bit better or has been through that. So ask about the options, and then the work is to evaluate those options depending on, on our values, on what matters for us. Because otherwise, if you just get, opinions of, unsolicited opinions, 5 different people, what they would do, it doesn't really help about what you should
Mm-hmm.
do. What helps is to know your options that are available for you, and to try and be creative with those, right? Combine them, or
Mm-hmm.
not think
Mm.
this or that, or how can I make them more interesting? And
Great.
that's another topic about being clear about what matters to you. That's a big topic
Mm.
right there.
Well, it's arguably the foundation of, whatever you're trying to decide, and that may change. What are your values and what do you want and why do you want it? And sometimes that we're not mature enough. I sometimes look at younger people and the choices they're forced to make educationally, and like, how would you know at 16 that you want to do this type of career path or this type of a thing? It's astounding, and maybe you're not deciding based on your own values and your own purpose, and you're deciding on the basis of someone else's. It's fascinating. It's very important work that we all need to do and come back to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Exactly. The influence that we get from other people's expectations about us.
Mm,
That's really important. Something to definitely look out for. And like you say, it takes. You need to walk through life a bit before you figure
mm,
these things out. But at the same time, you have to make a decision,
yeah, yeah.
different points in time. So it's always, better to move on, test things
Hmm.
out, keep an
Hmm.
open door if possible, and,
Hmm.
move on. Mm-hmm.
For sure. I love your blog posts, which I think are just wonderful, and that reminds me of one that I came across, and I'd love to dive into a little bit. And that's, you've written about indecisiveness. So,
Mm-hmm.
that, and not making a decision, and what's behind that, and what do you do? I'm sure some of my listeners think they might be the type of person who likes to overanalyze and optimize and make sure that everything is checked. And I feel like that. I probably put myself in that camp of being an optimizer, and that can also lead to indecisiveness. And there are those who just like crack on and just, they have a different style. But maybe for those who are feel sometimes indecision, if you could talk a little bit about that and how to approach it, how to get through it.
Right. So indecision was definitely one of the things that I got interested in studying more about decision making, because
Mhm.
I felt it to, like, losing time because you can't make a decision. Well, if first of all, you have to, determine what's the cause behind the indecision. It could be because, it's a trait of our character and it's become like a bad habit. And, what does that mean? It means that we don't really realize that, we're not just postponing a decision. We're making an implicit decision to not
Mm,
decide right now. It's not like we have more time to make that decision.
mm,
We're going to take the time, but you make a decision not to decide. So, um, and to get out of this loop, this habit loop, there are things that you can do to remind yourself, to give yourself a cue whenever you're deciding fast, like about what to eat or what to wear. If you do it like in, a few seconds, give yourself a treat, or, take a moment to pause and congratulate yourself so that you can try and reinforce the, deciding fast on, decisions that are, what was it? haircuts,
Oh yeah,
tattoos.
haircut, hat, tattoo. Yeah. Hmm.
Hat, right?
Yeah, hat.
Decisions that are
Hmm.
hats. I mean, you
Hmm.
don't need to decide.
Hmm.
That's a thing a lot. Well, it can also be, that we don't have our priorities straight. And we are
Mm.
distracted by decisions that are not really that important, but take up a lot of time. So then, it's a matter of really, sorting your priorities. And, if you take your calendar and you see how many hours do you spend, with the things that you really want to be spending with,
Right.
your family and you see that, it's not enough. There are a few that,
Mm.
okay, right? See how much time do you spend, commuting or in meetings that you think are not productive or, other things and, try to improve those or
Hmm.
reprioritize. It can also be, I mean, maybe we're indecisive because we're in a situation where all our options are bad and we
Mm.
feel really bad about making a
Mm.
final decision. And that's where the emotional aspect weighs in. And, we usually try to avoid bad
Mm.
feelings, but, like Susan David says, and I love her book, Emotional Agility,
Mhm.
feelings and emotions are just data. You don't have to act on them. You just have to take them into account, right? And you can simultaneously feel bad and
Mm.
choose the least worst option. It's okay
Mm.
to do both at the same time. I mean, you cannot try and escape those feelings.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I don't think it's always wrong to not decide or to choose not to decide. Sometimes it's a good thing to do as long as we're conscious of that. That's what we're doing. Now's not the right time or whatever. It's fine. If I'm hearing you correctly, indecisiveness, getting through it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, just choose something, just do something. That's not a good strategy, is it?
No, it's exactly. It's about being conscious about giving the right weight and time to the
Yeah.
decision,
Mm.
depending on its importance and one aspect. Yeah, not confusing the fact that you won't decide right now, um, with the fact that maybe you should decide, but you're really,
Mm.
procrastinating and buying
Right.
time. So exactly. Thank you for bringing out the nuance
No,
behind
no,
it.
no. Um, I love your approach to thinking through this. It's fabulous stuff. There's another topic I also wanted to touch on. It's favorite of mine these days, and I know you've written about it, and that's just complexity. So, we live in a world where we can't calculate all the odds. I'm also fascinated about your approach with this with regard to with mathematics and data. That the world's increasingly, so when I use the word complex, I mean we can't calculate all the variables. Even if you have the best computing tools, there's no way to do some type of probability analysis of every variable and come up with even range of possibilities. There are multiple answers to a problem, or sometimes there are no answers. And increasingly, it seems to me, the world that we're living in. And it used to be that if you're a big, I don't know, if you're NASA and you're trying to figure out how to launch an aircraft or something, or there's complexity there. But increasingly, even I think COVID brought this home, that there's complexity in the day-to-day decisions that we're making. Should I go to this place or not? Should I do this or not? And there are so many variables that are touching our everyday lives that sometimes it's impossible. You think about education. What is the world of the job market going to look like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? I don't know. And so we're increasingly having to make decisions under complexity. And I'm really fascinated by your thoughts on this, and therefore, how should we approach it? What are the things we should be? How should we be thinking about this?
So, yeah, there's complexity, there's uncertainty about, the different scenarios
Hmm.
that might come out. I'm going to answer first, as a behavioral scientist,
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
which is, I mean, it's very encouraging to see the direction that the field is going. It's also approaching problems at the systems level.
Mm.
That's a new initiative, and recognizing the forces that for any change that you choose to make, it's not gonna be like, okay, one group of people reacting to that. It's gonna be, all these interrelated forces and uncertainties, as you call them. I think. Well, I had a professor at the essay who used to say that, I mean, it will be a perfect day when human behavior can be put into equations, mathematical equations.
Okay.
I think that was his life
Mhm.
dream. And I think we really cannot overcome the complexity and the uncertainty, especially when you have to do with people. I mean, in the physics, for NASA, they can manage, if it's about, the physics environment, but when you have like the social, the human element, you cannot. A good approach to that, on a personal level is experimentation. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but
Mhm.
it's, take the case of an entrepreneur, someone
Mhm.
like us who is, they have their own business and they're trying things out. Having an experimental mindset is essential given, all the uncertainty, the complexity that we're facing. What does that mean? It means that, when we fail at something, we see it as, we rejoice in having data from
Mhm.
this thing that we failed that can
Yeah.
help us move
Yeah.
on. It's
Mhm.
not about, the primary feeling is not disappointment, but it's relief, and,
Mhm.
you feel that you have data. So in a complex world as it is, it's really important to not, try to hide
Mhm.
from uncertainty or try to, control everything. It's really about taking smaller steps and experimenting. I'll give you an example. I mean, in my early days with trainings, I had a collaboration with another firm. I was doing trainings through them, and we did one that was, I mean, for me, I thought it was a total failure.
Mhm.
The feedback was good, but feedback can be, a bit unreliable also. But for me, depending on how I wanted to do my trainings, it was really bad. Low engagement, low interactions. It wasn't,
Mhm.
it was a waste of time. So, but I knew it was an experiment. It was about, testing this collaboration. And having this mindset, then I was able to sit down and also talk to other people and discover, okay, why did it go wrong? First of all, going through another company meant that there was a wall between me and the participants, and I couldn't
Mhm.
investigate their needs really well.
Mhm.
Secondly, it was participants from many companies, which
Okay.
when they didn't know each other, they
Mhm.
needed time to bond. They needed a bigger, breaker at the beginning, like maybe even 30 minutes. Some people
Mhm.
mentioned from their experience that you need a lot of time to bring them together. Third, some people are being sent by their managers, and when this happens, they feel like unappreciated
Mhm.
because they feel like, okay, they send me to improve my decision making,
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. 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 I'm rubbish. So go there. Right.
Automatically
Mhm.
they are disengaged.
Mhm.
So things like that. So when you have the patience and the clear head to
Mhm.
figure out the reasons without blaming it all on you. Of
Mhm.
course, you have things to improve as well, but you also, have to see the context, and then you can, save yourself time by putting a stop to that and, reformulating your strategy. And that's perfectly fine, without
Mhm.
feeling like, oh, I'm a failure. No, it's an
Right.
experiment. There's
Yeah.
there's so
Yeah.
many factors at play
Mm.
for something
Mm.
to work.
Yeah. I often have to remind myself in my entrepreneurial journey that if what I'm trying to build, if I knew that if the world knew that it would work, then it would exist already. So it's a sort so that space, like you're in this uncertainty space where the only way to find out is to try. I love that explanation that you gave. I do wish that more and more leaders and policymakers would take that mindset that we need to try certain things, get data, and then continue, as opposed to thinking through, well, I'm going to. I don't know, I'm thinking from an entrepreneur's perspective, for example. One of the worst things that I think one can do and is just to sit in your office and design a product, or design the perfect product and then put it out into the market, as opposed to the concept of a minimum viable product, and you test and you refine. It could be it could be anything in your entrepreneurial journey, but there's no way of knowing unless you go out and find out.
Exactly. It's the same way that policymakers design policies most of the
Mm.
time. Sample of one, or, the
Mm.
members in the team, without um, really, trying to figure out how people view what makes it difficult for people, for example, to, eat more sustainably or use
Mm.
public transport more. You just assume that you understand because you've lived in this country for some time. So, but that's a really small sample. And
Mm.
how can you design anything for other people without understanding
Mm.
what gets in their way, what drives them? And because you mentioned for the complexity, I mean, one nice strategy for complexity is also, to you start a small scale, right? And
Mm.
you try to, when you're successful in one
Mm.
respect, you try to leverage that to go to the next part and the next part
Mm.
without tackling everything
Mm.
at once. This is the approach that we use when we advise the government here when it comes to, like, changing behavior,
Mm.
habits and decisions of citizens. Uh, it's never about having like these mass communication campaigns,
Mm.
trying to, oh, you should follow circular economy, because the European Union said so, and won't get
Mm.
fined because who cares, what the
Mm.
directives are. No, it's about making it easy and attractive for people to, like, use buses more, eat less meat, etc. So,
Mm.
and you can't address everybody at once. Much like entrepreneurs, right? You have to, like,
Yeah.
narrow it down, understand the
Yeah.
group that you're approaching, and if you're successful there, great,
Mm.
use that to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's challenging because it's hard to prioritize. You can do so many things, and it you need to be able to, as you say, narrow and then get data and move on based on what you learn. And I'm curious. I think sometimes the behavioral scientist in you, that sometimes the ego gets in the way, and when we're looking at a decision, sometimes it's the same as if we're thinking about, we're trying to collaborate and solve a problem, or even think about, a relationship. It's like there's two people, but there's the relationship is the thing, and we're trying to work together on that, or we're trying to make a decision, and making the best decision is what we're trying to collaborate on to get that as, as best as we can, as opposed to I'm emotionally invested in this option, and we should do this, and that's where things get tricky, right? When egos get in the way, we're not dedicated to making the best possible decision we can. We become wedded to becoming right. But I don't like that guy who leads that department, and so I want to outperform him, and all this stuff that prevents us from focusing on making a great decision.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that's missing, either we don't give it to ourselves or we're not given it, at work, the time and the space, right? To decide that, to calm down. We rush, like you say. I mean, we hear about someone else in another department we don't like doing something. No, that's not the right way. We should do it the
Yeah,
exact opposite way.
yeah,
So we don't give ourselves the time to think through something. And unfortunately, we don't give it to other people when we need them to think. And I think that's one of the fundamental things, this self-awareness of, I heard his name and I'm feeling a rush of flash. So because it shouldn't be basing any answer, any response based on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm. Um, I One of the things that really struck me, I really like your approach about, and you mentioned this earlier, is and it sounds really simple, but it's so important, is documenting your decision. I mean, writing down what you know when you're making a decision. I'm just wondering if you could just talk us through your approach to that. First of all, why is this so important? And what do you do? Let's say you're making an important decision. Not so much how you talk about how you approach it. We've talked a lot about that, but how do you make sure that I have a really good picture of what I knew and what I'm assuming at the time that I decided?
So I follow some format of a decision journal. Some template. It's basically like a short template. I really like the one by the Alliance for Decision Education, but you can customize it, of course. And what it includes and what it does. I mean, first, okay, you write the decision. Okay, what is the decision you're making? And which entails a little bit of framing the right decision, of course. Then you write, basic things about, okay, what are the criteria? I'll give you an example.
Sure. Yeah.
Which computer to buy? I want to buy a new computer. What model should I get? Then you put down the criteria. I mean, budget, processing power, memory. What are you gonna be doing? Do you need it for making videos, etc., like that? So then you go to you put down some options that you've done your research about, and you try to for the criteria that you put, see how these options, let's say, match. That's one type of decision. It's a little bit mathematical, simplistic, but more or less it's like that. So, and then, right. So you have an idea, then you go, you talk to more people, etc., etc. So you arrive at a good decision, the best possible decision given your weighted criteria. You buy that computer. Give it a week, give it a month, give it a year, how long it takes. Come back and say, okay, how good was that decision? I mean, were you happy with it? That's not about the quality of your decision. It's about the outcome. But it won't, if you took the decision using a good sound process, you did the best you could. But it's important to also look at the outcome so that next time you have to buy a computer, the next decision that you have to make that is similar, you find out, what you did wrong. In my example, I mean, that's an example that I did use. I mean, to buy a new computer, but I knew what model I wanted to get. So I was anchored to that model. Right. And I only researched the newest models, the newer models, since I had bought that. So I wanted to get a ThinkPad, just, it was about finding, okay, what new ThinkPads are there, the budget, which store. So it was really a really bad way to do my research. Because then when I went to the store and I saw all these other options and people talking to you about the other options, they all sounded much better than what I had in mind. And I wasn't prepared to judge because I hadn't done any research. And and now I have a computer that works really well. It's good. I mean, it didn't have an effect, but the way I made that decision was awful. Plus, I spent a lot more than I wanted to, or I wasn't. It was a really bad decision. Having done that mistake, the next decisions that I made, I was much more alerted towards, the way that I go about confirmation bias. Another decision that I had to make recently that, I used the tool, what we call kill criteria. That was really, really helpful was, my dog was sick. She had cancer and, we had decided, it was clear we don't want her to suffer. That was clear. We had decided that weeks ago. We talked to the doctor, it was clear. So when in the last few weeks, days even, things got really bad, really fast, and you find yourself at the vet's office, and they're telling you that there's nothing more we can do. What do you want? And, do you click on to hope that the dog might get better, or do you, relieve her from her suffering? And I was unable to make a decision in that moment, but I didn't have to think that fully. I had made it much earlier. And that example translates really well, I think, to other things in life, when we are emotional. If we put our kill criteria beforehand, like, when this presentation gets boring, I'm going to leave. When this part, when I start feeling tired at this party, I'm going to go because I have an early meeting. Or, when you start putting like these little proactive safety, it gets much, much easier to make decisions.
Such a great point. I'm sorry to hear about your dog. I'm a dog owner as well, so I completely understand. And when you're in it, when you're emotionally charged, you're not thinking straight. So, but you know that you're going to be in it, so you put the heuristics and the rules in place before. I'm thinking a lot about the turnaround time on mountaineering. If you don't get to the summit by 2 p.m., you have to, no matter, even if you're 300 meters from it, you have to turn around and go back because the chances are you're going to get stuck there and stranded and not be able to get down and die. And but when you're in the moment and you could see the summit, you think, oh, well, it's just a little bit longer. Let's just push. And no, you have to make those choices when you're not in those emotionally charged states. Is great. That's a great example and very useful technique. I'm conscious of time, but I did want to talk about decision education a little bit and decision quality in the world, and your thoughts on why we don't learn this stuff formally and what societies can do about it.
That's a great question. I did some research on that, and it seems that, many decades ago when the school curricula were put together, decision making was considered an innate ability, like a baby learning to speak. So it was something that, would pick up on mimicking others and stuff. And that's why it was never put into curriculum. And then the problem became, okay, if there is no curriculum, nothing to help the teachers teach it, it's really difficult to have like a special lesson on it. I'm sure, different schools incorporate it in different ways whenever they can. But I mean, I think most of the experience, at least mine, was like leaving school and knowing about, how to think about pizzas and probabilities, but not, not really understanding what that means in the real world, and we don't translate it really well. So I love, and I'm sure you spoke about this with Annie Duke about the Alliance for Decision Education. She's the founder of that. I love the work that they're doing with, creating the curricula to give to teachers to introduce decision education in early education. From then onwards, admittedly, it's more difficult to teach adults. You need to do some unlearning. You need to have, people realize that we're missing some basic skills that, we're supposed to know for so long. But I think there's the realization, slow realization, and demand for people to learn more. And to that effect, we've put together a decision-making survey with an international organization that we would be launching hopefully soon. And it's about trying to measure the perceptions of people about their own decision-making and about others. What's missing, what could be, what would they like to see more in terms of training and education. And I think that's a great way, hopefully, to get a picture of what adults want. I mean, we shouldn't wait for new generations to come until we can improve our level of, cognitive processes and, and big decisions and stuff. Because I'm a proponent, I really think that if we could make better decisions, most of the problems that we have would be much, much better, like from climate change to, everything. So it's good to, try to improve this kind of thinking in adults as well.
Yeah, you might mention a great point about unlearning. We need to unlearn this stuff, or things that we think are gospel, or some truths, or the fact that we may not do this as well as we think we do. It's a challenge. But yeah, interesting. Just to wrap up, I'm curious if you could explain a little bit more about your work. You've got the Meta Decisions as
It's my website.
your website. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you could just talk to us a little bit about that, and the work that you do, and who you work with, and those kinds of things, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So I work independently at the moment because most of the long-term contracts I'm on, I'm hired as Melina. So, and that's with the Cyprus Institute. That's a research institute, where we do research and advise the government, do some consulting for the government, for the projects they want to, apply behavioral science in, but also, improve their decision-making processes within the government. And, some ad hoc clients as well. And some, I also teach, at the local university, to bachelor and master students. I do corporate trainings because like you, Ben, I think the goal is, to have people apply better decision-making habits on their own. I'm involved in, very different initiatives and research projects around decision-making, mostly on a global level, and hopefully trying to bring this initiative locally in my country as well, in Cyprus as well. That will take time, but it's great finding, similar-minded people and organizations along the way. And you are one of them for having me today.
My pleasure. So lastly, we didn't talk about this, but you have a career in basketball. And I'm just curious how that's informed you, on decision making. I love sport. I think there are so many parallels, but I'm just curious how that's informed the work you do, if at all.
Yeah, well, it's not much of a career, but it's an achievement because starting from playing basketball in the court next to my grandparents' place with my sister and friends. Like we started, I was really, really young, elementary school. And then practice makes you better. I became really good, and I was called and I joined the national team, the young girls national team under 16, which it felt like an achievement, especially because it came so naturally, because
mm,
it is something that you love and you
mm,
just have fun doing it.
mm,
And it came like really naturally. And I hold on to that. I mean, I love basketball to this
mhm,
day. I rarely miss a game of my favorite team.
mhm.
And it's something that has taught me also a lot of, great, great lessons that, one person doesn't need to be just one thing. I was, kind of a bookworm, like very good
Mm.
student, but can also be good at sports. It's not, you
Yeah,
can be many things in
yeah.
life simultaneously. And
Mm,
that's the beauty of it.
mm,
And it also helped me, connect with different people, different kinds of people, feel inclusion, feel what it's not to be included. It put me into so many different roles, like feel like a leader, team member. It's given me great lessons. And, uh, I think, since you're into sports as well, I think you can understand what sports can give you.
I've never played at a national level, so that's very impressive. But very interesting. And I agree. We can be multiple things, and it's sometimes healthy, I think, when we are, because we're not attached to a single identity. Sometimes it's useful.
Yeah. Like the rooms in the house. Sometimes,
Mm,
you're in the bedroom, but that doesn't mean the kitchen doesn't exist. It's there.
mm,
You'll get into it. So it's good
mm.
to move around and have different, fit the different sides of yourself.
I do think that sport provides a lovely microcosm for quality decision making, because in many ways it's in a dynamic way. Basketball, for example, is a great example of that, because
Yeah.
you're trying to work the best opportunity for the best shot possible, but it doesn't mean the shot's going to go in, right? And through the course of the game, the team that, obviously need the best shooters, but you need to put them in the right positions to shoot shots. And they're not going to make every shot. In fact, for many, they're going to miss more than they make. But over time, you put your best players in the best positions to make those shots. Over time, they add up, they compound, and you have a much better chance of winning the game. And
Yeah.
this is the great. You can see that in a 1 hour or whatever, however long, how many quarters there is, and I lose track of whether it's 20-minute halves, or but anyway, in a contained space, in a 2 hour
Yeah.
time window, you can see, oh yeah, this team's better, even though a couple of times this other team made this crazy shot from halfway, and that's wonderful. But you don't want to be shooting the ball from the halfway point all the time, right? Sometimes
Exactly.
you take enough of them, eventually a couple will go in. But so it's a lovely microcosm. Basketball's a great microcosm for
I,
decision making,
I,
I think.
I love hearing you say that, because one of my projects is, I'm, I'm putting together material to combine, to explain decision making through
Mm,
basketball, some aspects
mm,
of it through basketball.
yeah.
What you said, but like, the cumulative effect of good decisions, even,
Hmm.
if not all should go in. And, yeah, and it's something that interests me. And I always find it easier to understand something through something that I love.
Yeah.
Uh, and
But
yeah,
by the way, I'm going to share an article that it's not basketball, but it is sport, and it's about the National Football League, and it's American football, and the
yeah.
idea of the draft. You they pick players, and the way it starts is that the team that finished last gets to pick first, and on
Hmm.
and on and on. And this is a microcosm as well around decision making, how to pick players, because you don't really know really whether or not a player is going to work out. And there's been some studies done on this, that the best strategy is to have more picks. So the more
Okay.
picks you have, the more chances you will get of getting, a few really good players. We overestimate our ability to be very precise.
Hmm.
These are people who know the players in the game, but ultimately that you get that wrong. So it's much better to have more picks, than trying to be very, very precision precise around a specific player. And so anyway, so that's a proven strategy of picking players in a sport. Anyway,
I look forward to reading that. Yeah, it sounds. Is it like Moneyball? I mean, it's been.
yeah, very,
Yeah.
very, very similar idea. But
Okay.
yeah, but yeah, sport is a wonderful microcosm, as you say, for good decision making. I'm really conscious of time, so I'll just we can wrap up there. Before we do, was there anything you wanted to mention that you don't think we got a chance to?
I'm fine. I just want to say a big thank you, and it's been great meeting you also, through this opportunity. And uh, yeah, thank you for having
No,
me here.
thank you. This is a wonderful conversation. I really love your work, your approach to decision making. So keep at it. We need more voices like you. And thank you very much. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Me too, Ben. Thank you.